Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, and welcome to this week's live chat. Feels a little different today because it's a Tuesday. Normally I go live on Thursdays, but since this Thursday is the 4th of July, I figured Jessica and I should probably take the day off and not be here. So I missed you all last week. I was out of town, but excited to be back today where I'm going to give you some practical tips on how to quilt smaller quilt blocks. Plus, if you're watching live, I have 2 giveaways and some new products to tell you about. So a lot of fun. If you are watching live, Jessica's here as always behind the camera. She's kicking out the spammers and writing down your questions. So if you have questions about the quilts I'm showing, she'll give those to me at the end and I'll answer them. If you're not watching live, no worries. These stay on my YouTube channel and you can get on there from whenever it's convenient and leave your questions in the comment section. From time to time, I get on there and answer them. So always about quilting, always lots of fun. Is anybody else out there like shocked that it's already July? Like, I just don't understand where the year went. And I know that's like part of growing older when you say stuff like, time is sure flying by, but dang, it sure is. But super excited because July means that we're getting ready to start a video series, our Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. And even though it's really nice and sunny outside, when it gets too hot, I just stay in and quilt. So great quilting weather for me. Anyway, so first of all, let's talk about the giveaways and the new products and kind of go over that. A lot of fun stuff. So first of all, I know for my American viewers, the 4th of July is coming up. You might be thinking, oh, it's last minute, I should make a project. Well, we have a cute little project for you. Super fast and super easy. And one lucky winner is going to get the quilt kit. To enter, just leave a comment on this live chat and Jessica will pick a winner randomly and I'll announce that at the end. So what's really fun about the quilt kit is it uses a pre-printed panel to quickly make it. So really you can make this quilt pretty fast. So a cute little panel like that, and then a couple pieces of strips, and then you have a beautiful, beautiful quilt. Nice little throw, something to sit out and watch the fireworks under. Again, it's giving one away, but if you want to get your hands on them, we have a few kits available, so you can click the link in the description box below and check that out. It's only $24.99. But since we're doing this live chat on a different day, I thought let's do 2 giveaways to really reward those of you that came on a different day. And I have a brand new FMQ, Free Motion Quilting Minis panel that I'm giving away. So this panel is adorable. One panel has 4 littler panels on it, and it's a fun little way to have a mini quilt to hang on your wall. It's kind of funny because this kind of came about because I was doing a test print and I just wanted to check the colors. So I said, we'll just make it kind of small. But I'll be darned if that thing wasn't the cutest little quilt. And so after printing that out, I was like, ooh, we should maybe do some more of those. So I picked some of my favorite challenge panels over the years. It's kind of hard to pick one because, I've done so many. But these are the ones I narrowed it down to. They are all very colorful. They all kind of go together. And whether you want to quilt one and put it on your wall or give it away as a gift, I mean, it's going to be a great idea. Great fun. So I actually have already quilted mine up. They're not bound. That's not surprising though to you, right? But they're so much fun to quilt, so cute and really adorable. I'm sure one of the questions will be, do I have videos for how to quilt them? Not right now. I'm focused solely on the next coming video series, but maybe we'll do a little quilting thing on them. But these panels did inspire the subject for today's live chat. As I was working through some of these blocks, I'm like, ooh, little blocks can sometimes be a little tricky to quilt. So I thought, let's talk about that. Anyway, the panel itself has the Feathers Free Motion Challenge panel shrunk down, the Dot to Dot, which you can see here, which I quilted, the Help, How Do I Quilt It, the first one, and then it also has the mandala. So all the mini quilts measure 16 by 20 inches roughly, and they all come on one big panel, and the price for that is also $24.99. Of course, one lucky quilter is going to get a quilt kit and a bunch of little mini quilts, lots of projects. But if you're not the winner, no worries, just click the link in the description box and you can get it there, purchase it there. So they're both $24.99. This is a limited edition thing, but if you want to get your hands on them, you can. Again, real fun, just, I don't know, sometimes it's just fun to be little and cute. All right, so when I was quilting it, like I said, kind of thinking through like what's something I can teach here. Like I love doing the live chats and I love just talking and having fun, but I always want the content I share to have, I don't know, some kind of teachable moment. I never want to waste your time. I never want you to watch a live chat and be like, oh, well, that was all she did was talk about herself, So when I was quilting these, I thought, let's talk about quilting small blocks. I say a lot through my live chats, bigger blocks, you can use echoing to shrink them down, but I never really talk a lot about smaller blocks. Now, I will say right off the bat, I like to joke that the harder it is to piece a quilt, usually the easier it is to quilt it. Because to me, difficult pieced quilts are tiny pieces. And when I'm working with a quilt with a lot of small pieces, intricate patterns, I know my only job is to not mess it up. It's those bigger blocks that give me trouble, right? You know, you get make a carpenter square quilt, you make a bunch of big half square triangles. Sometimes those can be tricky to quilt because they're so big and open. But let's see some examples and how you can address those smaller blocks. So first up, we have this quilt, perfect example of an intricately pieced quilt with lots of small pieces. This is a Judy Niemeyer quilt. I've quilted a few quilts for her over the years. Stunning. Oh my gosh, it's even more stunning in person. And I really want to be that kind of person that would start and finish a quilt like this, but I'm just gonna be happy with quilting them. I'm not really good at all that intricate piecing. But when I'm looking at those small blocks, the first rule, probably the most obvious rule, is to keep it simple. I mean, obviously, with a smaller area, you don't have a lot of room to put anything overly difficult or intricate in that area. But even if you try to kind of force something in there, it's going to give you a lot of thread buildup, which could take away from the beautiful piecing. So use this kind of as a time to do something easy for you, something that's not too fussy, because again, I don't want anything really super dense in those areas to take away from the beautiful piecing. I will make a quick note about quilts like this. This one is paper pieced, foundation paper pieced. Judy's patterns are amazing. They have very few bulky seams for the way that she writes the pattern. But sometimes when you're working on those paper pieced blocks, watch out for the bulky seams. That adds another little thing to think about, especially if you have a lot of fabrics coming to one point. I do take that into account when picking out the designs. But anyway, keeping it simple means just kind of highlighting the pieces. You know I'm going to say echoing, right? I could probably just say echo and we'll call it good there. But in those little bitty pieces, just adding some echo lines, some very simple, just something in there to kind of add a little bit of detail. And I have a more close-up picture here. You can see there, it's going to still highlight the piecing. It's still going to look gorgeous, but it's still going to be easy to work with. So nothing overly fussy and nothing crazy. Within this block, inside of it, I just did kind of a gently kind of curvy, almost looks like a fern that goes up into each of those points. Nothing that's going to be too intricate. I mean, obviously with that block, I'm not going to be able to fit a feather in there. But again, just kind of using the piecing as a guide. And then we know I love echoing, so I included some echoing on the outside as well. That quilt was so much fun to piece. I love such beautiful colors. Another thing you can do is think about the designs that don't need a lot of space to develop. Continuous curve, a single swirl, maybe a dot-to-dot design, something that's going to be, nice and beautiful, but not going to be over the top. One of my favorites for Lone Star quilts or small diamonds is this swirl that fills in that shape. What I love about that is I can start from the bottom, quilt my swirl, and come right back to my starting point. So as you're working with designs, you can kind of just make a mental note. Ooh, this would be cool in a smaller block. So you can have some variety. It's not like every block has to have continuous curve. You can, like I said, you can do some different things, but just kind of using that idea as a simple kind of shape. Another thing you can do is think about something like maybe a meander or something you use in a different area of the quilt. Is there an individual component that you can take out and use it in the block? So if I were doing, let's say, paisley feathers, which have a nice elongated swirl as a spine, instead of quilting the whole feather, I can pull out just a little piece of that and plop it in there. There's other things to think about as well, like the designs I pick also depend on how I'm working through the quilt. For instance, that swirl will bring me back to the starting point, but if I don't want to do that, I might do something different. But really keeping it simple. It's so, I remember when I quilted for customers and people would give me a quilt and they would say, I want to do a test run. It was like let's see how you do. And they would give me something with really small blocks or busy fabrics. And I'm like, well, that's not the time to go crazy with the quilting in general, in my opinion, I should say. Now this is a close-up of one of the quilting on one of the minis. Those little stars, you can kind of see it real size right here. It's hard to get a sense of scale on the camera for sure, but it's only a couple inches big. On the actual panel that I quilted for this video series, I did serpentine lines, I did feathers. there's not going to fit any of that in there. So just doing some diagonal lines that go from point to point. With this particular idea, since it's a panel, I don't have any bulky seams to deal with, so that's great. But if this star was actually a pieced star, we know that center might have a really bulky seam. So this might not be a design I do in that area. But the main idea being, I'm keeping it simple, keeping it nice and easy. In fact, you can see towards the bottom or on other sides of that star some other examples, some continuous curve, just some simple echo lines, just nice and easy. Here another example, just having something that just kind of goes in and fills it and moves on. Really, when I'm looking at it and I'm trying to decide what to do, I'm trying to think, where do I want the lines to go? Where do I want the eye to go? And how can I accomplish that with the fewest number of lines in the quilting? Like I said, just because I don't want the quilting to overtake that beautiful piecing, especially if it's something that's been, intricately put together, which is usually the case with those small blocks. It's not like we ever have just like one little block just hanging out there. Usually they come together, and so there's multiple things to deal with. Echoing is always going to be a great option. We're going to see that again here in a second. But this right here is the center from the mini panel as well. You can see how tiny that is. So just a little bit of echoing just to kind of get in there and quilt it. I love to quilt things to death. Quilt it till it has too much and add more stuff to it has always been my motto, but sometimes just keeping it, a little bit more on the simple side. So again, this should be like I don't have to go all out and work on, spend forever doing it. Second option, also probably quite obvious, leave it unquilted. Now, depending on the size of the block and my own preferences, that will determine whether I'm going to leave it unquilted or not. This particular quilt we saw in an earlier live chat, just not too long ago, when I talked about quilting an English paper pieced quilt. If you look towards the center of that block, there's some little teeny tiny blue, like diamond kind of shapes. I just left those unquilted. They're too small to add anything in, and it's just easy enough to continue on. Now, as I was putting these pictures together and, kind of putting this whole presentation together, because I do spend a little bit of time working through that, I was trying to think of a good rule of thumb. Like, how do you know when to leave it unquilted? Well, that's one of those personal preferences. That's all it is. If you look at it and you think it will look good unquilted, then do it. If you think it needs a little something, put a little something in there. There's no hard, fast rule. So don't feel like, if it's more than 3/4 or if it's an inch or what have you. But I didn't have a good rule of thumb for that. And here you can kind of see a little bit up close. In all those individual pieces, all very small, just some diagonal lines. Just there's that swirl again in the white diamonds and then the unquilted part as well. So sometimes it's just best just to avoid it. Be like, I'm just going to leave that one alone and move on. I have a couple more. It was actually kind of hard finding examples of unquilted areas in my quilts because I do like to quilt them so much. But in this quilt, this is one from several years ago by Tula Pink with the Bjorn bear pattern. And you can see, there's a lot of detail to it. I left the eyes unquilted because I don't know what to do here. And it was only like 1/2 inch. And then even in the white kind of muzzle area, I just kept it nice and simple. Some echo lines, a couple diagonal lines. So again, you don't have to quilt everything and you don't have to quilt it difficultly. You can kind of, just do a little bit there. So just leave it unquilted, just avoid it. But sometimes that's not possible when you have something like this. Now, this is the moth quilt from the book I did with Tula Pink, Quilt with Tula and Angela. It was pretty fun for our big quilt walk, which has been like almost a month ago, which is crazy to think about, isn't it, Jessica? Like, oh my gosh, like, whew. Anyway, I borrowed some of the quilts that she has from our book and took pictures of them so I could have them. And this was the perfect example. Sometimes those smaller blocks come together to make a bigger picture, and quilting each block separately can detract from that bigger picture. And this is a perfect example of that. This moth quilt is pieced with little bitty strips of color. I don't even know how she was able to pick the colors and to put them where and even to piece this thing. That's crazy. But I knew like if I went in and quilted each little piece, it's not going to contribute to that, overall inspiration. This quilt was probably the hardest one to quilt out of that whole book because, it wasn't huge, but like, how do you quilt a moth? And how do you quilt a moth made with little bitty pieces? So I decided first and foremost, I'm going to combine the blocks. Instead of looking at the individual pieces, I'm just going to define an area, whether that's, the whole moth, whether it's the top of the wing like I did here, and then quilt it as one block. So you can use a quilting to combine those blocks and do something over a bigger area. This is great because you might find it easier, and it also helps kind of, I don't know, keep the inspiration. It helps keep that piecing from overwhelming the main overall look. So in the top of the moth, I did some like swirls with pebbles. That took forever. Was fun to look at when it was done, not so fun mid-quilting. But again, just didn't treat every piece separately. I combined them together and then used that as my block to fill in. Then on the bottom, you can kind of see, so I started with the top and I did that swirl on those intricate tiny pebbles, and I'm like, oh, the bottom part of this moth has got to be easier because this is taking forever. So instead I just did some kind of, I call them droopy feathers, but just some lines that kind of curved and came down just to give it some movement, make it look nice and have a nice contrast with what I did on the top. Now, if you were to see this quilt and to pull me aside and be like, oh, Angela, what's your inspiration? I might say something like, I love the contrast of the dense quilting on the top and the lighter, curvier quilting on the bottom. But you need to know it's just because I was tired of quilting by the time I got to that point. But I still think it has a good result. So use the quilting to combine several smaller blocks to make it a little bit easier to quilt, whether it's because of the inspiration or just because they're smaller pieces. This is another quilt from that same book. It's kind of fun because, it's been a while since we did this book. It's been a few years. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I did quilt this. And what was I thinking when I did it? There were some questions during our dinner and our presentation. They're like, what thread color did you use? And I'm like, oh, I don't remember. But example here, beautiful curved pieces. They were small enough. They were big enough. I could have done something in each one of them. But instead I used the quilting to kind of group it together, some diagonal lines and some continuous curves. So when you're picking designs out for your quilts and you're getting stumped, sometimes stepping back and looking at a slightly bigger version or the bigger picture might give you some inspiration. So use that quilting to combine the blocks and make it a little bit easier. This quilt was also in the book, and I took some pictures of it when it was here. It's white on white, so it was very difficult to get all the detail, but hopefully you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Use echoing around the outside to help separate smaller blocks when there's a lot of quilting around them. So up to this point, all the blocks or all the little pieces have been part of a bigger picture that kind of let you see the whole thing. This quilt was so adorable. Tiny little squash blocks. They were not very big, and then tons of space to quilt. Now, thankfully, since the background was white and those blocks are so colorful and beautiful, I knew they weren't going to get sucked into the quilting or disappear, but it was a great kind of teachable moment, to use that phrase, to say, how can we help separate the blocks from the background? So if you find yourself in this situation, not only do you have to think about what am I going to put in the blocks, but do I want to make sure I separate it from the background? So here you can kind of see a little bit closer up. Again, those blocks are pretty small. I don't know exactly how big. Let's just say 4 inches. I don't know, but they were tiny. And I knew that I wanted to do some swirl chains that kind of wrapped around. I was going for this whole medallion look. I would show you more detail, but it was just, I could not get a good picture of it. So you'll just have to take my word for it and know that it looks gorgeous. But in each row or each section, I did a slightly different version of echoing. Echoing doesn't have to be exactly the same all the way around. So for instance, in this block, this is what we would think of when we think traditional echoing. Same shape, a set distance away from the block. And you can see here, keeping it very simple in the piecing. There's no quilting in any of the triangles, and only in the center do I do a little continuous curve, grouping the blocks with that design. So allowing that little bit of unquilted area to kind of stand out from the rest of the dense quilting I'm doing in the background. Depending on the size of the block, depending on your own personal preferences, you can echo it more or less. I did 2 kind of echo lines on here, but it could have just been, that's just what I was feeling. I don't know, there's no set rule. But that echoing or that idea of using the quilting to kind of set it apart can look different. So here's an example here where I just, kind of made a block or a square around the outside and echoed it as well. So you can be creative with that. You can, have a little bit of artistic license with it, just whatever you want to do or whatever you can do to separate it from that dense filler. And then you can see around it those dense back and forth lines and then those paisley feathers. This one was one of my favorites because it's echoing, but it's not straight line. It has a little bit of curve to it. So kind of following the same basic idea, but instead of quilting a straight line, quilting a curved line that kind of goes from point to point. So kind of like a continuous curve outside the block. I love how it just gives it a slightly different look. This is a great option if you want that echoed effect, but you don't like quilting straight lines. If you're on a long arm and you don't want to use a ruler, or if you're on a sewing machine and you're like, man, I just feel more comfortable quilting those curved lines, this is a great option. Plus, it's cute and whimsical and lots of fun. And there's nothing that says that you have to do one over the whole quilt. I kind of did one row with one way and the next row and kind of alternated that. So you can definitely do that. So I know that was kind of quick. That's just a little bit of like, hitting there. And sometimes the most helpful tips are the most obvious. So don't feel like you have to do really difficult stuff in those small blocks, especially if you have tiny blocks that you spend a lot of time piecing. Use echoing to help separate it. Leave it unquilted if you want, or use the quilting to group it together. And no matter what you do, it's going to look great. I know it's hard when you have that quilt that you spend a lot of time intricately piecing, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to mess it up. But I promise, when you step back, all you're going to see is the beautiful texture and the lovely quilt. All right, a couple things before I answer questions. The first video in our upcoming Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along is on July 9th. So on July 9th, at I think 9 o'clock is when I have it scheduled to come out. That video will come out on my YouTube channel, and then you can watch it and then get the free quilting diagrams and then try out the designs that I have in the free video series. I won't be having a live chat though until July 25th. I have a date on here in a second. So the video series will start. We'll have a couple of videos, and then I'll be back with a live chat to kind of recap the previous videos. The live chat's something I do, throughout the year, but it's very, very helpful if you're quilting along with me during the video series, because you can ask questions specifically about what we're learning. Not that you couldn't come on here at any time, because you definitely could. You could say, hey, I'm taking the rulers challenge, help me with this. But sometimes it's just nice to see other people's questions and what we're going over. So again, the video series starts July 9th. Here is a picture of the panel that we'll be quilting through. We do have a few of those left, but if you want to order them, I would go ahead and do that as soon as you can. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm super excited, and I can't wait to hear what everybody thinks about it. And like I said, I'm not going to be back next week or the week after for a live chat. I'm going to be back on July 25th. So a little bit of extended hiatus. I'm going on a family vacation, but I don't know. I'm going to try, we're going to be up in Alaska, but I'm going to try to pop on maybe on the Facebook group at some point and do a live impromptu chat. But our YouTube chat won't be until July 25th. I have my room all set up and all comfortable, and I don't like to do the YouTube live chat anywhere but here. So that will be on July 25th. So if you're freaking out, where did Angela go? I miss her so much. Don't worry, I'll be back on the 25th. Now let's see the questions we've got. And again, if this is your first time watching, I'm super excited that you're here, and join us for more live chats because we have a lot of fun with it. Can I do a teaching or a free motion challenge on big all over designs, quick designs? That's a great idea. Help, I need to finish this quilt now. Or help, I need to quilt this quilt for somebody I love that's not quilt worthy. Totally, yeah. So I'm going to put that one aside. That's a great idea. Any suggestions for learning micro quilting? Micro quilting is amazing. It's teeny tiny quilting that really can smash down an area. When micro quilting, a couple things. Don't try to learn a design really small. Learn the design in the size that you feel comfortable with, and then you can scale it down. Depending on what machine you're working with, make sure you're quilting within your control zone. So on a long arm, I'm not going to try to do micro quilting out there or real close to my body. I'm going to kind of do it right here. But here's the good news. Anything you do really small is going to look good, because people will just be impressed that you quilted that small. So there's a little bit of more room, I think, for error, because this is kind of all dense. So it's very, very exciting. I'm long arming an applique quilt. I'm stitching around the applique, but not quite sure what to do in the background. Any suggestions? It depends on what that applique is. Now, usually, most often, applique seems to be like flowers or really kind of nature-inspired things. So use that as a guide, right? If I have a vine with some leaves, I can maybe quilt some little leaf shapes in the background and then just kind of do some filler design around the rest. Here's what is also kind of exciting about applique quilts. Much like small blocked quilts, people are just gonna be super impressed that you did that. So with the quilting, keeping it very simple inside, and then just, adding some texture and some beautiful designs in the background. But when you step back, really that applique is what's gonna shine. So I won't say don't put so much thought into the quilting of it, but don't stress out too much about it because the applique is definitely going to shine. Do I have any suggestions for quilting designs for male quilts? So for quilts that you don't want a curvy, feathery design, it's funny, I'm gonna jump ship here a second. So my husband and I had this big debate about it because I said, well, these are more masculine designs. And he's like, well, all quilting designs are just designs. So I thought that was kind of interesting to hear his take. But anyway, if you're looking for more, let's say masculine or things that aren't so curvy, think leaves, swirl hook, wood grain, think points and wavy lines. That will really give you that kind of idea there. Boxy kind of shapes. We're going to, in fact, in this upcoming free motion challenge, we're going to learn like a little boxy kind of design to fill in strips. That's always a great option too. So just think, it's probably such a stereotype, I don't know, but sharp lines, points, and some nice textures. Did I do the main motifs in the top of the moth wings, then come back and do the pebbles? Did I do everything as I worked through it? I did everything as I worked through it. You totally could though. You could go do all your big scroll kind of shapes, and then come back and do all the pebbles, or you can do a section and then continue on. I really needed the swirls to help break up all those pebbles. I mean, I was like 10 minutes into it. I'm like, this was a bad choice. The result is going to be great, but I just get very bored doing the same design over and over again. So using the swirl to kind of break it up and kind of helped me not be so bored as I was doing it. So I would quilt a couple sections of swirl, work my way back, fill it in, and then continue on. But if you're like, no, I just like to do something, get it done, and move on, then that's fine too. So just know there's much different ways to do that. What book am I referring to with Tula? So Quilt with Tula and Angela. I should have put a picture on the little the presentation. That was like obviously dumb to not do that. So it's a really kind of unique book because it was a collaboration we did together, and it has patterns and the designs in it. So she talks about her color selection. It's broken up like into cools and warms and all these different things. And then I kind of talk about how I quilted it. And we tried as best as we could to kind of like, I don't know, encapsulate our collaboration, you know, like when she gives me a quilt, what is it that she says and what that she wants? So that was kind of a lot of fun to work with her. So you not only get patterns, you get quilting designs. And I always thought it would have been fun to write the book on the other side. Like, so I'm telling you color theory and quilting, quilt patterns, and she's quilting, but we'll just stick to what we're good at. But that's on our website, or if you want to reach out, we can send you a link to it. Do I plan out my quilting using a software or app? I do not. So when I started quilting, that's a great question, by the way. When I started quilting back in the day, you know, there was no apps and I didn't have any software for it. I would just draw it out and then just kind of audition designs. Now, when I get stuck or I'm not sure what to do, I take a picture with my phone and I kind of audition designs with the pen, draw it out. It's something I kind of showed a little bit when I did the whole live chat quilting an EPP quilt. So you can check that out. And you can kind of see some really rough sketches I did to kind of visualize it. When I first started quilting, I would have done a lot more planning out or visualizing. But now I feel pretty comfortable, like, okay, let's just start here and kind of let it progress. But there are times I definitely get quilter's block, and that's the next question. Do I ever get quilter's block? Definitely. You know, like there's always those quilts I'm like, oh, how can I quilt this? Or maybe I want to quilt it a certain way, but I have a time constraint. So sometimes just giving me a second to visualize it. And so when I draw out the designs on my phone or even like on a rough piece of paper, just to kind of help visualize it. There's nothing wrong with planning everything out ahead of time. Not at all. Definitely do that. But don't be so stuck to your plan that you're afraid to jump ship if it's not working out. So sometimes the best plans just don't come together. So be flexible when it comes to that. All right, so we have two winners. We have Sharon Holborn, which won the minis panel. So Sharon, leave us a comment or email us with your address. And then Linda Hammer won the Flag Day quilt kit. So congratulations to Sharon and Linda. I'm super excited for you. I hope you like them. Again, if you have any questions, you can click the link in the description box. You can leave a comment on the video, or you can reach out to us at customer service because we want to make sure that you're successful with all the stuff that we're sharing. So I'll see you through a video on the 9th, and then I'll see you again on the 25th for a live chat. I hope you all have a great holiday for those of you that celebrate. I hope everybody stays warm or cool, depending on where you are, and I'll see you soon. Until then, everybody, happy